Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is not a frontline update, but a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the juicy tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Let's just start with a very brief bit of news, possibly some good news from Solidar. That is the place that is under a huge amount of pressure from the Russians, Wagner, the VDV, which is the airborne troops, and the LPR, the Luhansk People's Republic troops, have apparently taken 80% of the settlement. Well, there could have been a counterattack. The claim is that the 46th Brigade regained control of the railway station and one of the mines during a counteroffensive in Solidar. So potentially good news there. We'll see how that comes about. There will be news filtering through from the day's fighting that's sort of coming through at the moment, and I'll assimilate all that and give it to you in a package tomorrow. But let's move on to something else. So Challenger 2 tank, what do you know about the Challenger 2? This is something that the UK government is supposedly pledging to Ukraine, although there are some rumors it could be the Challenger 1. But if it is a Challenger 2, this is a pretty impressive tank. Let's have a look at some of the details of the tank. So it entered service in 1994. Depends... Often with these tanks, it depends what the upgrades are. So the upgrade for the Challenger 3, for example, is replacing the entire turret. I believe they'll just keep the Challenger 2, the main part of the tank, and then whack a new turret on it. And, you know, Robert's your mother's brother. You got a Challenger 3. The Challenger 2 was developed as a private venture to replace a previous Chieftain main battle tank. That was the big British tank at the time. Entered service in 1994. Currently, the Challenger 2 is in service with the UK, 386. I don't know how recent this is. Oman, 38. Recently, a couple of proposed modernisation programmes for the Challenger 2 were proposed. However, due to budget cuts, the British Army could completely retire its Challenger 2 fleet in the near future. Well, actually, it looks like they're going to get the Challenger 3 upgrade. It's one of the most protected tanks in the world. This main battle tank provides a very high level of protection against direct fire weapons. It uses a Chobham composite armor of second generation, and I believe that's going to be upgraded to a lighter version in the Challenger 3. It's lighter than the original Chobham, but offers better protection. Tank's turret was redesigned. Explosive reactive armor kit can be fitted for improved protection. The Challenger 2 is fitted with NBC, which is nuclear, biological, chemical protection, and automatic fire suppression systems. This main battle tank can be fitted with visual and infrared smoke screening system. So what it can do, for example, is throw out by chucking in diesel into the exhaust, it throws out smoke. A smoke screen, rather than using separate sort of smoke canisters and whatnot. It just uses fuel. Tank is fitted with a rifled cannon, rifled gun. That does mean it can't fire some of the most modern types of ordnance that require what's called a smooth bore. So the rifling it's kind of a spiraled rifle through the cannon. That's how I understand it. It does shoot 120 mil ordnance. The Challenger 2, I know the Challenger 3 will be more NATO compatible, I think. So that is a bit of a challenge because it'll fire different stuff to a lot of the equipment that the Ukrainians will be using. It has, I think, the record for the longest hit. So it took out a tank, longest tank kill in history. Took out a tank, I think 4.1 kilometers, an Iraqi tank. So that's pretty impressive. It's got a 7.62 coaxial machine guns. Coaxial means that they are mounted and fire in the same direction as the cannon. Coaxial mounted with the main gun, while the other is placed on top of the roof. So there are two of them. And so on and so forth. It's a pretty impressive piece of kit. It is pretty weighty, but it has got a really good range. It's not powerful, can't go as fast as, say, the Abrams, but it can go, I think, twice as far in its in the range and what it can drive on. Useful Reddit thread. The Abrams tank, which is an older tank, so the American tank has been around for longer. Again, it depends what upgrades you've got, but someone just on Reddit was like, "Oh, let's compare them." So someone says the Challenger 2 has much more protection. It uses a rifle gun versus smooth bore. The Abrams. Don't know the difference between the performances of the guns in that respect. That means the Abrams will be able to fire some pretty funky ordnance some of the most modern ordnance, whereas that requires smoothbore, whereas the Challenger won't be able to. And then this guy has got a nice little comparison here. After a little digging, I found this out. Mobility, the Abrams wins. So it has 23.8 horsepower per ton versus 19.2 horsepower per ton for the Challenger, 72 kilometers per hour versus 59 kilometers per hour. So the Challenger is slower. However, I'd give suspension to the Challenger 2 because it is hydro pneumatic, meaning it can manually lean the tank and depress any side to get a lower silhouette versus the Abrams torsion bar. The range of the Challenger is also about double the distance of the Abrams. The Abrams has 300 horsepower more. However, the engine has a much greater thermal image. Yeah, so and the Abrams, I think, is famous for churning through fuel. It is very fuel inefficient. So armor, the Challenger 2 wins, second generation Dorchester armor. Maybe not if the A2 has a third generation DU armor added. However, this is a separate upgrade. Still feel the Challenger has a better frontal armor. Also, it's able to inject diesel into exhaust to make a large smoke screen. Yeah, that's what I was talking about. And actually, I've seen that on a video somewhere else. Both gun sights and commander sights are around even. Both have thermal and infrared. Challenger 2 com sights are panoramic. The gun, it's a tie, or perhaps the Abrams wins. Both are 122 mil. Both can knock out almost anything it'll face. Both very accurate. However, the M1A2 smoothbore, allowing it to shoot any NATO round. I believe this means the Challenger 2's gun can't shoot APFSDST rounds, but don't quote me on it. So I think some of the more funky rounds it can shoot. The British generally rely on HESH rounds, so on and so forth. So just a little bit of comparison, if that's interesting to you. Whoop-de-doo. I might actually just show you a very quick video, just to show you what it looks like. So as I think this video shows you, it has the brilliant sort of record of not once being destroyed in battle. Someone has claimed on another thread that it has been hit in friendly fire, but certainly from an enemy tank. So this is a Forces News sort of Challenger 2 synopsis.
Not once has it been destroyed at the hands of an enemy.
At the hands of an enemy, yeah. So it's resistant to rocket-propelled grenades.
A 26-litre diesel engine drives the axles that move the 65-ton vehicle.
So it's fairly heavy.
It's longer than a London bus, and its presence can stretch to a range of 340 miles, or 160 off-road, with a full tank of 1,592 litres. Diesel can be injected into the tank's exhaust to create a smokescreen, throwing the enemy off. There's also 10 smoke grenade discharges available. The turrets are currently being upgraded on some of the UK's tanks. Challenger 3 will use a smoothbore gun, but the Challenger 2s with the British Army since the 90s use a rifled 120mm gun, carrying 74 rounds on a turret rotating a full 360 degrees. It's got an NBC protection system for nuclear, biological and chemical threats. Alongside the main weapon, a chain gun and a general purpose machine gun for the cruise loader. And on board with them is what's called a platform battlefield information system application, giving the commander a live readout of the battleground from inside the turret. The tank's also fitted with panoramic sights, a laser rangefinder and thermal sensors.
So kit like this is great. Challenger 2s are great. Abrams would be great. Leopard 2s would be great. Leclercs would be great. These main battle tanks are superb pieces of kit that will, really show the Soviet era equipment for what it really is, which is outdated. The Russian version, the T-14 Armata, is prototype. It's not out there. So let's get some of these modern tanks on the battlefield. However, they aren't game changers. Giving 10 Challenger 2s isn't a game changer. Giving 20 Abrams isn't a game changer. HIMARS were a game changer because things changed then. Suddenly, the Russians couldn't put any kind of decent equipment within, or accumulations of equipment and personnel within 8,400 kilometers of the front line. Okay, that changes things significantly. And you see the damage the HIMARS have done over the course of this war. Wow. And the single most important piece of equipment, arguably, the Gimlers and the HIMARS for changing the course of the war. This kind of stuff, it could be a game changer if it was in a tipping point was reached, a cumulative tipping point. So if you said, right, 10 Challengers, 30 30 Leopards, bunch of Abrams, you got 80 main battle tanks or something like that, then a couple of hundred modern NATO IFVs and MRAPs and all the stuff that they have been given. But if you start, putting all this together and form these, brigades and what have you, battalions and what have you, and then say, right, here is an offensive force that is packed full of awesome stuff. Now let's do a counter-offensive and then compare what would, obviously you can't do that, but compare what would have happened without that kind of kit. Then that's potentially a game changer. You can commit to offensive maneuvers that you've got a much higher chance of success in because you are using a wide range of brilliant kit. But on their own, in individual 10s and 20s and whatnot, doesn't really make a difference. Especially, you look at someone like Bakhmut, Solidar, Ukrainians are on the defense there, so there is no real use for tanks like this. Otherwise, they'll be throwing tanks in there. But, Russians have got ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles, shoulder-mounted ones, pop them off down the end of the street. Dangerous place for tanks to be. I would argue, yeah, you can use them in urban environments, but in urban environments and with buildings that have been half destroyed, there are plenty of places to hide and you can just pop them off. So I don't think equipment like that would have been useful in Bakhmut. What would have been useful is more people, electronic warfare to jam comms, loads of drones, artillery, mortar fire, and lots of it. Stuff like, you can imagine, I wonder whether HIMARS could be used tactically in a place like Bakhmut, in the same way that today we hear about a cruise missile, or no, sorry, ballistic missile being used on Solidar from the Ukrainians, taking out 100 people. Now that those kind of things that can change the course of Solidar and Bakhmut. Successful counterattacks that wouldn't necessarily involve main battle tanks, but involve people on the ground, boots on the ground, really decent boots on the ground, and decent tactics. So yeah, that's my view there. Just loads of equipment, get it all into Ukraine, get them trained up. Let's just do it, lots and lots and lots, as it looks like it is happening. But obviously, everyone's shouting, every pro-Ukrainian is shouting more, sooner. And yeah, in a perfect world, that's how it works. Okay, let's move sideways to China. Does China? This is from Alexander Gabarov, who is a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He says, does China distance itself from Russia because of war against Ukraine? A terrific Financial Times piece helps to understand how Beijing wants its policy towards Moscow to be seen in Western capitals. Spoiler alert, the real policy might be very different. Let me help to unpack it. This excellent piece in the Financial Times is well worth your time. Bottom line, after securing his third term, Xi Jinping, the ruler of China, has changed all the rules so that he can, a bit like Putin. This is what autocrats do, authoritarian dictators will change the rules so that there's no chance of you being sort of voted out, no chance of you being deposed. You've got rid of all the people who could fill a power vacuum. So you create a potential power vacuum such that no one wants you to go because there's no one else to fill it. There's no one going to be the Brutus to stab you in the back. So Xi Jinping's done a lot of that throughout his since he came along. He's cleared out all the alternate factions within Chinese politics, so there's really no one else to replace him. I may be simplifying. Someone who's more expert on China can let me know. But here he is, ruling for life or near as, and saying to Europe, "Yeah, you guys, we do a lot of trade with you. And we need to continue doing that. You are super important. In fact, you're more important than Russia." Here we are. Look, we're kind of lukewarm on what Russia's doing. Let's say this publicly. Yeah, it sucks a bit. Sorry about that. So can we still do business? And then behind the scenes, it's like, oh yeah, we had to say that, Russia. Anyway, Putin, can I have all your oil, all your gas, and keep it coming, keep it coming. That's really what's happening, playing both sides, as most canny, someone like Erdogan in Turkey is doing a very good job of that as well. This includes efforts to distance China from Russia, or at least tell the West that Beijing is doing so, because Chinese leadership sees that China's reluctance to criticize the Kremlin and join Western sanctions is viewed in Europe as tacit support for Putin's brutal war effort. Quote, several Chinese officials in private conversations with the FT strove to put clear daylight between Beijing and Moscow on the issue of Ukraine, a message that has being repeated to some European EU diplomats. Putin is crazy, says one official who declined to be identified. Other Chinese talking points on Russia policy include: one, Putin didn't tell Xi about his plans to invade Ukraine during the 4th of February summit in Beijing, and thus an idea still so popular in the West that Putin must have told Xi something because of the no limits partnership is wrong. Interesting. So this might actually have annoyed Xi, and he's thinking, you didn't tell me about this. I've been blindsided. That's not cool. It's just not cool. So I'm not going to support this war as fully as maybe I would have done if we had talked about this and maybe planned strategically to do this together in some kind of unison. Two, demotion of Vice Minister Lei Yucheng. China's top Russia expert, happened because he was held responsible for the intelligence failure on the Russian invasion. In 2023, he was the likely successor to Wang Yi as head of the MFA, but the job went to a Chinese ambo in America instead. So I think that's this person here. Sorry, I'm reading from the Twitter thread, so linking in Twitter handles rather than saying the people's names. So that's interesting. So it's a good indication that Xi Jinping wasn't too happy with not really knowing that the invasion was going to happen. So he basically, demoted the guy that was in charge of Russian intelligence. So three, China is willing to use the closeness of its relationship with Moscow to restrain Putin from resorting to the use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and the readouts of Xi's meetings with the head of Germany, US, and France attest to that. This is interesting. So I think there's quite a lot involved in this. China don't want a nuclear war for obvious reasons. Like it's mutual destruction is not good for the world. Anything that's not good for the world is not good for China. So nuclear war is obviously a bad thing. But not only that, if they even use sort of so-called tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, China own 15% of the Ukrainian farmland. 15% of their farmland is a big investment to get food production and food to a massive population that China has, 1/7 of the world population. So if you poison that land with nuclear radiation, then that's a really poor investment on China's part, but also they're not going to get the food that they want. Nuclear wars are not good for food production, and food security is going to be huge going forward. China are in a pretty precarious position economically, and particularly because instead of it's the same with the Western world, instead of having pyramids of population, so that the old at the top, there aren't so many, are being sorted out by the welfare state or by an economy that is being propped up, fulfilled by those wider echelons of people further down the pyramid, the younger people. That's how traditionally things have worked. But actually, it turns out that we've got societies that look a bit like this, or possibly inverted even, where we've got this we have people having fewer babies, growing older population, and as they age and go into retirement, then the productivity of those people goes down, but then they are drawing on welfare and so on and so forth, and not as many people are working as needs to, and you get there's a potential implosion going to take place, and China has actually apparently reached that sooner than people were imagining. So they've got to play things really carefully in terms of their economics. They're on the brink of potentially a big recession. So yeah, it takes some careful navigation here. Number four, finally, China now perceives the likelihood that Russia will fail to prevail against Ukraine and emerge from a conflict a minor power, much diminished economically and diplomatically on the world stage. Thus, the EU should think that China will prioritize ties with the EU over ties with Russia. Absolutely bang on, I think. Like, if China are worth anything in terms of strategic planning, it will be to work out that there's no way Russia can win. Ditch them. In fact, I have also said before, I think China benefit more if Russia lose than if Russia win. Yeah, there might be ideological ties that put these two nations together, but really that's worth diddly squat when it comes to China being interested in power and money. natural resources with their massive population and needs. So if Russia lose this war, China can waltz in and go, oh, really sorry to hear you've lost this war. We'll help you get back on your feet. Oh, and by the way, we're going to take control of your oil reserves, your gas reserves, your coal reserves, whatever. We're going to be a big part of this Phoenix from the flames that Russia will want to be if it gets a bloody nose from Ukraine. It will become a minor power, and it will arguably become a vassal state of China. And China would like that. I think they would like that more than if Russia won. If Russia wins, then there's awful lot of awkward situations geopolitically. How does the West feel about that? Where would the whole world be left at a position where Russia won? And would China as easily be able to take advantage of that situation than if Russia lost? Pretty much think that China would prefer Russia to lose. So let's look at the merit of and novelty of these China talking points before trying to unpack what China's actual policy towards Russia is now, nearly a year into the horrors of war, and why Chinese diplomats want to spin it the way they do in talking to European audiences. The Putin is crazy quote shouldn't shock, as it reflects a pretty widespread attitude towards Putin's impulsiveness and emotionality among many Chinese officials, including people working on Russia in lots of organizations and the expert community, at least since the 2014 annexation of Crimea. This attribute builds on a degree of disrespect towards Russia that's common among some members of the Chinese elites. Russia was USSR, but now it's a third world country with nukes run by crooks, is the kind of thought. But to think that this attitude dictates Beijing's policy towards Russia is a mistake. Chinese sources of the Financial Times are right when they say Putin didn't tell Xi anything and China was not aware of the invasion. Well, he didn't tell his prime minister and governor of the central bank. Why would he tell a foreign leader? Quote, partnership without limits are just words. But some observers and officials in the West have taken much more serious than the Chinese and the Russians, who are pretty cynical about these pompous phrases. The most significant proof that China was not aware of Russia's plans was failure to evacuate Chinese citizens before the war. As for Lei Yucheng's demotion, it looks like an attempt to put blame on someone who was hardly in charge given his rank and the MFA's low role in managing the relationship with the intelligence on Russia. Chinese systems simply got Putin wrong, like many other governments, by the way. A reminder, for some time before the war, Team Biden tried to work with China through a bunch of different people, reported the New York Times, sharing intelligence about upcoming Russian invasion of Ukraine. The CIA was super protective of sources and methods for obvious reasons. So that's interesting. And then, quote, after one diplomatic exchange in December, US officials got intelligence showing Beijing had shared the information with Moscow, telling Russia that America was trying to sow discord. Not sure this could have happened without a nod from Xi or at least Yang Jiechi. So that's interesting. So here's the idea that America were aware things were brewing in Ukraine with Russia and were actually sharing this information with China, who didn't know anything. But then China went and told Russia that they'd been told this by America. And then so America go, right, we ain't going to be working with you closely again. As for Chinese claims that Beijing works behind the scenes to convince Putin to seek peaceful resolution or at least not use nukes in Ukraine if he feels that he is losing the war and it might be the end of his regime and him, we don't have any evidence that China actually does it. On the record, even in readouts of Western leaders' meetings with Xi, the Chinese leader doesn't go beyond banalities like sky's blue, peace is better than war, and nuclear weapons are terrifying and shouldn't be used. Neither do other Chinese officials. As for the view in Beijing that Moscow will emerge from this war weakened, truth is that a weakened Russia will be dependent on China, and it will be an asset in Beijing's quest for regional and global power. Exactly what I was saying. Look for some nuance in this foreign affairs piece. I'd be interested in reading that. Russia's economic and tech dependency on China is growing day by day, and so is China's leverage. So the more Russia depends on China, as it gets more and more mired in the quagmire of this war, the more China are thinking, yeah, nice, we've got leverage on you. Yep, brilliant. So there you go. For the quantitative metrics of China, Russia, we see an across-the-board growth in 2022, more trade, more military exercises, more deals. I've summed it up in this thread. There is nothing to suggest that China changes course on Russia. Well, this is the idea that actually, if Russia does really well, then China does loads of trade deals with Russia, and that's fine. And if Russia does really badly, China mops up the end result and has a little dig into the natural resources of Russia. So it's kind of win-win no matter what happens for China. And so they can probably play this pretty well. So on and so forth. I mean, there's goodness me. I mean, this thread is one of the longest threads on Earth. So there's lots more to be said there. I'll leave it there before I bore you senseless. But I think there's lots of thinking to be done about how China sees Russia, like really and truly, and it goes on to say it's not quite so. It's not quite as the FT said it was, and here there is some more nuance. It's interesting to see where the world goes after an eventual Russian loss or after an eventual Russian win. Where does China? How does China play itself? And it really should be a case of, are they lost? Well, we did distance ourselves from them. Let's go and pick up the pieces. Or are they won? Well, we've always been pretty friendly with Russia. There you go. We're our mates, and now we form the world superpower axis of China, and Russia and other nations who want to join in. And so, as I say, win-win for them. Let's have a look at other bits of news to do with the war. Norway has handed over 10 bridges to Ukraine with a total value of a Norwegian krone of 30 million, according to the Ministry of Infrastructure of Ukraine. Soon, Todor expects bridges from Sweden and another batch of temporary Czech crossings. It's stuff like this that kind of go under the radar that are super useful. If you want to either fix bridges or build bridges for military, pragmatic use, then this kind of stuff is really necessary material, and it's very useful when countries give that to Ukraine. Super cool. I talked to you about this evacuation this morning in my Bakhmut update, and this is an M113, but it says, this is what casualty evacuation looks like in surface to air missile controlled airspace, and this is in the icy hell of Soledar. Actually, I think this was just a little bit before the proper cold weather came in and before the snow, although it's pretty icy and cold, but this is probably from about 4 days ago. So you got this, and I know some people slag off these M113 APCs have been pretty old. I mean, they've been around for a long, long time. But here is one absolutely hammering it into Solidar, and it goes actually to a place that is further to the south, more over to the southeast of Solidar, which has now been, under Russian control for a good couple of days. Goes to this building here. You got the aggregates behind there. Charges in. You see them get out. I mean, that looks like something out of the Vietnam War, there, doesn't it? But yeah, because these probably were used then. They whack someone in, and then drone footage, and this is the incredible footage that you can get with drones nowadays, that you just get a real sense of what goes on in war and the dangerous things people do. We've got so many videos of people getting killed and blown up, and all horrible, the horrors of war being played out on our screens across the world in almost real time. It's just incredibly at once amazing and at another time disturbing, but it certainly gives you an access to things that we just previously have struggled to get so much footage of. There you go. So that's a medical evacuation, and great to see that it appears that was safely done, and that vehicle was not hit as it's sort of motoring along as quickly as it can to avoid being hit. Moving targets obviously more difficult, but there you see, you've got artillery being aimed, one would assume, specifically at this. There'll be drones following this vehicle from the other side, and detailing back to the artillery crews where that vehicle is and where to fire their ordnance. I talked about two private military groups, mercenary groups being set up, two Russian groups being set up. Well, and there's also news that a Belarusian group like Wagner has also been set up, called Guard Service. The company has significantly increased the number of employees and is preparing to participate in military operations, according to Belarusian opposition. Now, I find this interesting because this might be a way that Lukashenko and Belarus can say that they're helping in the war without properly helping, by actually sending in mercenary groups that aren't really, national entities, but are associated with Belarus, and they can send people in that way. That could be that could be a way that he navigates that fine line between doing what Putin wants and not doing what Putin wants and trying to appease the West. This is a video that's done the rounds. Russian Mobics from the 392nd Regiment are asking the media to pay attention to the deplorable state of their positions and lack of supplies, apparently, in the Luhansk region. They were moved from prepared positions into ice pits while the command is blackmailing them. So there are accusations of blackmail here. And I'll read some of these subtitles for you. So these are our fantastic positions. Prepared, scare quotes, prepared according to the opinion of our command. And they're smashing the ice with their rifle butts. We're supposed to effing live here. Nah, drown. 10th of January 2023, 392nd Motorized Rifle Regiment, 3rd Battalion, 10th Company. So pretty clear on who they are. Initially, our command offered us to move to prepared positions. For clarity, it's minus 20 degrees Celsius outside right now. We're offered to live here in the ice. At the same time, our leadership is blackmailing us, not providing us with medical assistance and supplies until we move to these positions. We offer this video appeal to be reviewed by military prosecution, FSB, Vladimir Putin personally. I think you're more likely to end up in prison, mate. We believe that these actions of our command undermine the combat capability of our army. Minus 20 degrees cold, the guys will simply freeze here and get ill. Who is going to be fighting? We won't even make it to a fight with anyone. Initially, when we arrived here to the SMO, Special Military Operations Zone, we were told we'd move to prepared positions, and this is how prepared they are. The command claims they ran out of funds. Moreover, they are not shy of directly telling us that the funds were simply stolen. And this is the kind of stuff that goes on, you know, the corruption. And now they're demanding us to move here. For clarity, we prepared everything ourselves in another forest area. We brought everything for our own money, stoves, built roofs, dug everything, bought shovels. It was all ours. Nothing was provided to us. Here we have intermittent disruptions of water and supply. The command is not shy of simply blackmailing us. We are asking to make this public, to pay attention by society, media, and power structures. They're not happy. Guys, our company will simply die here without men even meeting the enemy. So there you go. These guys are certainly not happy with conditions, and that is nothing unusual. But it's interesting when you see this, you know, because pro-Russians will say propaganda, and this is like clearly, you know, Russian soldiers telling the world what they really believe, and this gets back to their command. And well, who knows what happens? Maybe these guys end up locked up or reprimanded, or something might happen. Who knows? But things are not well in the state of Denmark, or in this case, Russia. Royal Mail overseas post badly disrupted after a cyber incident. Not sure if this is Russia, but there are some rumours that it was. Royal Mail's overseas parcel service was severely disrupted, and that caused quite a bit of news and consternation in the UK. Just to remind people that hackers are still out there, and in fact, there was a report about I think 200 attempts on Ukrainian cyber infrastructure since this year or something. I don't know, some amount in some time, but basically the idea is it's still happening. But I did report somewhat recently that actually Russia have been really, and there's a very interesting report on this that I referred to, have been pretty impotent when it's come to their cyber warfare, and people were expecting Russia to be far more incisive and, you know, far more far-reaching in their cyber warfare attempts, and they just haven't. There have been some, and there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to stop these things from happening, from being so effective. So there is that, but actually, you would have expected Russia to have been so much more successful than they have been in the cyber warfare dimension. Anyway, there you go. Lots of stuff. stuff for you to talk about. Let me know your views on some of these subjects. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for supporting the channel. Really appreciate it. And I will catch you tomorrow for a frontline update. Bye bye.